"James," Mary whispered, her voice cracking from years of disuse. The sound, barely audible above the raging thunderstorm, was the first word she had spoken in 8 years. The look of shock on James Blackwood's face mirrored her own terror. After nearly a decade of silence, she had broken her vow in a moment of weakness, potentially signing her own death warrant. Welcome back to Zenith Inspiring Stories. Have you ever had to stay silent when you desperately wanted to speak up? Share your story in the comments below. 8 years earlier, Mary Jackson had been a rising star in the classical music world with a voice as beautiful as her piano playing. That was before she overheard the conversation that changed everything. "Make it look like an accident," the man had said. "The Jacksons know too much about the compound. They can't live to publish those findings." The next day, her parents' car veered off a cliff. The official report called it an accident. Mary knew better. Would you stay silent for years to save your own life? Like this video if you'd have the courage to do what Mary did. Mary recognized the voice that ordered her parents' murder, a voice belonging to someone powerful enough to make people disappear. If they discovered she was a witness, she would be next. So she made a desperate choice. She would become mute, not through injury or illness, but through sheer will and determination. The world would believe she had experienced traumatic mutism after her parents' deaths. For 8 years, she communicated only through written notes and her music. The piano became her voice, expressing what her lips could not. She built a new life as a music therapist at Westlake Rehabilitation Center, helping others heal while hiding her own wounds. Her fingers spoke the words she couldn't say, creating melodies that touched broken souls. No one suspected that her silence was a carefully constructed lie, a shield protecting her from those who would silence her permanently. She kept her parents' research hidden, notes on a rare plant compound that could revolutionize treatment for several degenerative diseases. The same research that had gotten them killed. The same research that pharmaceutical companies would kill for. Then James Blackwood walked into her therapy room, and everything changed. The Billionaire pharmaceutical CEO was there to announce a new funding initiative, but when Mary's fingers touched the piano keys, playing a haunting Chopin nocturne, he stopped mid-sentence. Their eyes met across the room, and something electric passed between them. What Mary didn't know was that James Blackwood had secrets of his own, secrets connected to her parents' research, secrets that would soon shatter her carefully constructed silent world and force her to choose between continued safety and silence or the dangerous freedom of speaking the truth. And the most dangerous truth of all? She was falling for the man who might be connected to her parents' killers. The staff at Westlake believed her silence stemmed from trauma. Only Mary knew it was a deliberate choice that kept her alive. Every morning, she woke with the weight of her secret pressing against her chest, the words she couldn't say collecting like stones in her throat. Her apartment was a sanctuary of solitude, books stacked on every surface, sheet music organized meticulously, and a baby grand piano that consumed most of her living room. The walls were soundproofed, not to keep noise out, but to ensure no one heard her practicing late into the night. Behind a false panel in her closet, Mary kept her parents' research, formulas and observations about a plant compound found only in a remote region of the Amazon. The Jackson formula, as her parents had called it, could potentially halt cellular degeneration in neurological diseases. Their last message to her had been jubilant. Breakthrough confirmed. Results beyond expectations. 2 days later, they were dead. Mary lived on high alert. She changed apartments every 2 years, used cash whenever possible, and avoided cameras. She had no social media presence and few friends. Her colleagues respected her privacy, attributing her reclusiveness to her disability. They never suspected she was hiding from killers who didn't know she existed. At night, she sometimes dreamed of speaking again, of laughing, singing, arguing, whispering secrets to a lover. She would wake from these dreams with tears streaming down her face, the phantom sensation of words on her lips fading like morning mist. The irony wasn't lost on her that music had saved her sanity. When her parents died, she had been studying both piano performance and vocal arts at Juilliard. She abandoned the latter, channeling all her expression into her fingers instead of her voice. Then came the email announcing that Blackwood Pharmaceuticals would be funding a new music therapy wing at Westlake. The name had made Mary's blood run cold. Blackwood was one of the companies that had been interested in her parents' research. Could this be coincidence? Or had they finally tracked her down? James Blackwood straightened his tie as his driver pulled up to Westlake. At 34, he commanded a pharmaceutical empire worth billions. Yet board meetings made him less nervous than these public appearances. He preferred laboratories to limelight, formulas to fame. Few knew that James had built his empire from nothing. Abandoned at a fire station as an infant, he'd bounced through foster homes until a high school chemistry teacher recognized his brilliant mind. A full scholarship to MIT followed, where he developed his first patented formula at 19. By 25, he'd founded Blackwood Pharmaceuticals with a mission to make cutting-edge treatments accessible to everyone. The wealth came later, almost as an afterthought. What drove James wasn't money, but the memory of a foster brother who died from a treatable condition because his foster parents couldn't afford the medication. Never again, he had promised at the boy's grave. Behind his success lay a man who struggled to connect with others. His childhood had taught him that attachments were temporary, that people left. He kept everyone at arm's length, colleagues, women, even friends. His company became his family, his work his passion. As they passed a therapy room, a melody stopped James mid-stride. The notes were haunting, Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor, but played with such raw emotion that it transcended the composition. He paused, drawn to the doorway. A woman sat at the piano, her dark hair falling forward as she leaned into the music. Her eyes were closed, her expression one of complete surrender to the piece. The room was empty except for her, yet she played as if for an audience of thousands. "Who is that?" James whispered, unable to look away. "Mary Jackson, one of our most gifted therapists," the director replied. "She works primarily with trauma patients and those with speech difficulties." "She's extraordinary." "Yes, and quite remarkable herself. She hasn't spoken a word in 8 years, not since her parents died in an accident. Communicates entirely through writing and music." Something about the woman called to James on a level he couldn't articulate. Perhaps it was the vulnerability in her playing, or the strength it must take to navigate the world in silence. Whatever it was, he found himself walking into the room as if pulled by an invisible thread. Their eyes met, and James felt an unexpected jolt of recognition, though he was certain they'd never met. Something in her gaze, wariness mixed with intelligence and a hint of defiance, intrigued him immediately. "Please," he said, "don't stop on my account." Mary studied him with an intensity that made him feel exposed, as if she could see past his tailored suit to the orphan boy beneath. She reached for a notebook beside the piano, quickly writing before turning it toward him. "Private session. Preparing for patients." "I'm James Blackwood," he said, extending his hand. "Your playing is extraordinary." She hesitated before accepting his handshake. Her grip was firm but brief, as if physical contact was something she rationed carefully. She wrote again. "Thank you for funding our new wing. The pleasure is mine. Music therapy aligns with our research into neurological treatments." Something flickered in her eyes at the mention of research, a shadow of emotion he couldn't identify. She wrote, "What specific research?" The question seemed oddly pointed, her gaze suddenly sharp. Before he could answer, his assistant appeared at the door. "Mr. Blackwood, they're waiting for you." James nodded, reluctant to leave. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation later? I'd love to hear more about your work." Mary hesitated, then wrote, "I have patients all afternoon." "Tomorrow, then? Lunch?" She stared at him for a long moment before writing. "Why?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. Most people jumped at the chance to meet with him, for connections, for funding, for proximity to power. Her suspicion was refreshing. "Because in a world where everyone talks constantly, I'm curious about someone who chooses to listen," he answered honestly. Mary studied him, then slowly nodded, writing. 12:30. The cafe across the street. Their lunch conversation flowed through her notebook, awkward at first, then increasingly natural. James asked about her music therapy techniques, showing genuine interest in her methods. Mary found herself sharing more than she intended about how music created pathways of communication when words failed. "Like how you're communicating now," he observed. She wrote, "Different. I choose not to speak. My patients often can't." "Is it really a choice?" he asked quietly. "Or a response to trauma?" The question hit too close to home. Mary's pen hovered over the page before she wrote, "Some wounds heal better in silence." James's eyes darkened with an emotion she couldn't name. "I understand that better than most." He told her about growing up in foster care, about the loneliness of being passed from home to home. "I learned early that words were often empty. Actions mattered more." When he spoke about his company's research into neurological treatments, Mary carefully steered the conversation toward his interest in rare plant compounds. Her heart raced as she wrote, "Any breakthroughs with botanical extracts?" "Actually, yes. Our most promising treatment is derived from a plant found in the Amazon. The compound shows remarkable ability to repair neural pathways." Mary's hand trembled slightly as she wrote, "The Jackson formula?" James's expression shifted, surprise evident. "You know about it? It's not public knowledge." She quickly recovered, writing, "I read widely. Neurological research intersects with my field." He studied her with new interest. "The Jackson formula is named after the scientists who discovered it, brilliant researchers who died before they could complete their work. We acquired their initial research through a subsidiary company." Mary fought to keep her expression neutral, though her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the connection she'd suspected. But was James involved in her parents' deaths, or merely benefiting from their stolen research? Mary's apartment door was slightly ajar when she returned from work on Friday. She froze, keys suspended in midair, every instinct screaming danger. 8 years of vigilance hadn't dulled her caution. If anything, it had sharpened it. She backed away silently, heart pounding. Then she heard movement inside, drawers opening, papers rustling. Someone was searching her home. Before she could decide what to do, a man in a dark suit emerged from her apartment, speaking quietly into a phone. "Nothing here. No sign of the research. Keep looking." He headed toward the elevator, never noticing her in the shadows of the stairwell. Inside, the destruction was methodical rather than random. Desk drawers emptied, books pulled from shelves, even her piano bench upended. They knew exactly what they were looking for. The false panel in her closet remained undiscovered, her parents' research still safely hidden. But the message was clear. They were closing in. Her dinner with James was in 2 hours. Was this connected? Had their lunch conversation somehow exposed her? She considered canceling, but instinct told her that whoever had searched her apartment wasn't working for James. The timing felt wrong. Mary packed essentials quickly: clothes, toiletries, her notebook, and most importantly, her parents' research, which she secured in a waterproof pouch inside her bag. She couldn't stay here tonight. Perhaps not ever again. A text message interrupted her thoughts. "Is everything okay? James." She stared at her phone, surprised he had her number, then remembered she'd written it in her notebook during lunch. After hesitating, she replied, "Someone broke into my apartment." His response was immediate. "Are you safe? Where are you?" "Hotel." "I'm fine." "Police?" "No police." There was a pause before his next message. "I have a lake house. Secluded, secure. You'd be safe there until this is resolved." Mary's fingers hovered over her phone. Going to James's home would be either the smartest or the stupidest decision of her life. If he was connected to her parents' deaths, she'd be walking into the lion's den. If he wasn't, she might finally have an ally. "Why would you help me?" she texted. "Because I think you're in danger, and I think I might know why." Those words sent a chill through her. Before she could respond, another text arrived. "I'm not your enemy, Mary. I think we're both looking for the same answers." Mary closed her eyes, making the hardest decision since she'd chosen silence 8 years ago. Address. The storm rolled in just after midnight, lightning splitting the sky above the lake house. Mary woke to the crash of thunder, momentarily disoriented in the unfamiliar bedroom. Rain lashed against the windows as another lightning bolt illuminated the room in stark white. A sound from downstairs caught her attention. Not the storm, but something else. Glass breaking? Mary slipped from bed, pulling on a robe as she moved silently to the door. The main floor was dark except for flashes of lightning through the windows. She made her way carefully down the stairs, pausing when she heard a whimper from the living room. James sat on the floor beside the couch, knees drawn to his chest, eyes wide and unseeing. Another crash of thunder made him flinch violently. Mary approached slowly, kneeling beside him. His breathing was rapid, shallow, a panic attack. She touched his arm gently, and he startled. "Sorry," he gasped, embarrassment crossing his face. "The storms, they bring it back." She raised an eyebrow in question. "The night I was abandoned," he explained, voice tight. "It was during a thunderstorm. Left at a fire station in a cardboard box. I was 3. Another lightning flash made him tense. Stupid to still react like this. Mary shook her head, squeezing his hand. She reached for her notebook on the coffee table, but it wasn't there. Upstairs in her room. James's breathing grew more erratic as the storm intensified. Mary recognized the signs of escalating panic. Without her notebook, she had no way to calm him, to tell him he was safe, that he wasn't alone anymore. No way except one. "Breathe," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "James, breathe with me." His head snapped up, eyes wide with shock. Mary continued, each word feeling foreign on her tongue after 8 years of silence. "You're safe. I'm here. Just breathe." You can speak," he said, momentarily distracted from his panic. "Yes," she whispered, the sound barely audible above the rain. "I always could." She guided him through breathing exercises, her voice growing slightly stronger with each word, though never rising above a whisper. Gradually, his panic subsided, replaced by confusion and wonder. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why pretend to be mute?" Mary hesitated, then made a decision. After 8 years of silence, the truth deserved to be spoken aloud, even if only in whispers. "I was there when my parents were murdered," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "Not at the scene, but I overheard the man who ordered it. On the phone," he said. "Make it look like an accident." James listened, transfixed, as Mary continued. "I recognized his voice. He was a colleague of my parents, someone they trusted. If he knew I was alive and had heard him, I would be next. So I disappeared, became someone else, someone who couldn't speak and therefore couldn't identify him." "For 8 years?" James asked, incredulous. "At first, it was just survival. Then it became easier not to speak, to hide behind silence." She looked down at their still joined hands. "Until now." "Why break your silence for me?" he asked softly. "Because you needed me to," she answered simply. The vulnerability in her admission hung between them. James reached up, gently touching her cheek. "Your voice is beautiful," he said, even in a whisper. Mary felt tears forming. "It's dangerous. If he ever heard me speak." "Who is he, Mary? Give me a name. I can protect you." She shook her head. "I need proof first. The formula isn't enough. I need evidence connecting him to my parents' deaths." James nodded slowly. "We'll find it. Together." The next morning they contacted the FBI, and the investigation started going on. 6 months later, Mary stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the sleeves of her concert gown. After 8 years away from the spotlight, she was about to perform again, not just as a pianist, but as a vocalist. Nervous, James appeared beside her, handsome in a tuxedo, his shoulder fully healed. "Terrified," she admitted with a small laugh. "What if my voice cracks? What if I forget the words?" "Then you'll keep going," he said simply, taking her hands in his. "Just like you've always done." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind. Victor Mercer's trial had made international headlines, the pharmaceutical executive charged with orchestrating the murders of renowned researchers David and Elena Jackson. With testimony from Mary, Dr. Diane Reynolds, and mountains of evidence from James's investigation, Mercer had been sentenced to life in prison. Lawrence Harmon, extradited from Switzerland, had turned state's evidence against Mercer in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony had revealed the full extent of their conspiracy, how they had planned to commercialize the Jackson formula exclusively, how they had arranged the accident when the Jacksons refused to sell, and how they had hunted for the missing research components for years. 2 minutes, Miss Jackson, a stagehand called. Mary nodded, taking a deep breath. This concert was more than just her return to music. It was a benefit for the Jackson Foundation, established by James to continue her parents' work. The foundation was already funding research and treatments based on the complete formula, making them accessible to patients regardless of their ability to pay. I still can't believe we're here, she said softly. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm still hiding, still silent. James squeezed her hands. But you're not. You're free. Your voice is back, in every way that matters. Mary smiled, remembering how gradually she had reclaimed her voice over the past months. First in whispers with James, then in normal conversation, and finally in song. The foundation received another 1,000 applications for treatment grants yesterday. James told her, "Your parents' work is helping people all over the world." "Our work now," Mary corrected. As the scientific director of the Jackson Foundation, she had thrown herself into continuing her parents' legacy, working alongside researchers to develop new applications for the formula. 30 seconds, the stagehand announced. James leaned in, kissing her softly. "I'll be right in the front row." Mary touched the delicate diamond pendant at her throat, a gift from James on the day Mercer was sentenced. Not an engagement ring, not yet, but a promise for the future. They were taking things slowly, building a relationship based on trust and honesty after the deceptions that had initially brought them together. As the stage lights dimmed for her entrance, Mary squared her shoulders. Tonight's performance would conclude with a song she had composed herself, a piece about finding your voice after years of silence, about the courage to speak truth to power, about love that breaks through fear. The audience applauded as she walked on stage, the spotlight following her to the grand piano. Mary seated herself, adjusting the microphone position to capture her voice. "Good evening," she said clearly, the words carrying through the hall. "My name is Mary Jackson." The simple introduction brought tears to her eyes. For 8 years, she had been unable to say those words aloud. Now she spoke them to a packed Carnegie Hall. She began with Chopin, the same nocturne James had first heard her play at Westlake. Her fingers moved with confidence and emotion, telling the story of her journey through the music. When she finished the classical portion of her program, Mary moved to the microphone stand at the front of the stage. "Many of you know my story," she said, her voice steady. "How I remained silent for 8 years to protect myself after witnessing a crime. What you may not know is how it feels to reclaim your voice after so long, the terror and the joy of speaking again, of being heard again." She glanced at James in the front row, drawing strength from his presence. "This final piece is called Breaking Silence. I wrote it for everyone who has ever been afraid to speak their truth, and for the people who give us the courage to finally do so." As the pianist began the introduction, Mary closed her eyes, letting the music wash through her. When she began to sing, her voice filled the hall, clear, powerful, and unafraid. In the audience, James watched with pride and love as Mary's voice soared. The woman who had pretended to be mute for 8 years was now commanding one of the world's greatest stages with that same voice. Her transformation from frightened witness to powerful advocate moved him beyond words. After the standing ovation, after the bouquets and congratulations, James and Mary slipped away to the rooftop of his Manhattan penthouse. The city lights sparkled below them like earthbound stars. "You were magnificent," James said, handing her a glass of champagne. "It felt like coming home," Mary admitted, "not just to the stage, but to myself." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city below. So much had changed in 6 months. Mary had testified at Mercer's trial, her voice unwavering as she identified him as the man who had ordered her parents' deaths. And through it all, James had been beside her, supporting without controlling, loving without demanding, partnering in both the foundation work and in life. "I have something for you," James said, setting down his glass. "A gift to celebrate tonight." He handed her a key. "What's this?" she asked. "The lake house," he explained. "I've signed it over to you. It's yours now, free and clear." Mary looked up in surprise. "James, I can't accept." "It's where you first spoke to me," he said softly. "Where you broke your silence after 8 years. I hoped it might be a place where you'd want to build new memories, where you might want to build a life." Understanding dawned in Mary's eyes. "Are you asking me to marry you?" James smiled, taking her hands. "Not yet. We've agreed to take things slowly, and I respect that. But I am asking if you see a future for us, a future where one day I might ask that question and you might say yes." She closed her fingers around the key, then reached for his hand. "I don't need to take things slowly anymore, James. I know what I want." His eyes widened. "And what's that?" "Ask me," she said simply. "Ask me now." James hesitated only a moment before dropping to one knee, taking her hand in his. No prepared speech, no rehearsed words, just the truth. "Mary Jackson, I love you. Your courage, your talent, your heart. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will." As he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, the only family heirloom he possessed, Mary pulled him to his feet and kissed him deeply. Later that night, as they lay together watching the sunrise from his bedroom, Mary whispered, "For 8 years, I was silent to stay alive. Now I want to use my voice to really live." James traced the line of her cheek. "And how will you do that?" She smiled, eyes bright with plans and possibilities. "By speaking for those who can't. By making sure my parents' work helps as many people as possible. By singing and playing and never taking for granted the freedom to make sound in this world." She kissed him softly. "And by telling you I love you. Every day. Out loud." 1 year later, Mary and James were married at the lake house, the ceremony held on the dock where she had once hidden her parents' research. Dr. Reynolds, who testified about what happened to her parents at the court, was her matron of honor. The Jackson Foundation had already funded treatments for thousands of patients, with clinical trials showing remarkable success rates. Mary's recording of Breaking Silence had topped the classical crossover charts, its proceeds going to organizations supporting witnesses and victims of crime. She performed regularly now, her story inspiring others to find their own voices. As they shared their first dance as husband and wife, James whispered in her ear, "Happy." Mary looked up at him, at the man who had helped her reclaim her voice and her life. "Beyond words," she replied. Then she laughed, a free, joyous sound. And that's saying something, coming from someone who went 8 years without them. The story of Mary Jackson and James Blackwood reminds us that sometimes our greatest strength lies in what we believe to be our greatest vulnerability. For 8 years, Mary's silence was both her prison and her protection, a shield she built around herself that kept her alive but prevented her from truly living. Her journey teaches us that while silence can preserve us, it's our voice that ultimately sets us free. Consider how many of us remain silent in our own lives, not because we're hiding from killers, but because we fear rejection, judgment, or failure. We stay in jobs that drain our spirits, relationships that diminish our worth, or situations that stifle our potential. Like Mary, we convince ourselves that silence is safer than speaking our truth. But what Mary discovered through her ordeal is what we all must learn, that finding the courage to break our silence, to speak our truth even when our voice shakes, is the only path to authentic freedom. When she finally whispered those first words to James during the thunderstorm, she took the first step toward reclaiming not just her voice, but her entire identity.